This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me we're not telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
Man, I thought arm day was going to be rough after not having lifted weights in a week. And then leg day came. That one hurt. I had no idea my legs were going to be on fire like that. It's not even like I'm inconsistent with regular leg workouts. I do them twice a week. Granted, they always suck. But I didn't realize it would suck even harder not having the chance to do it for 7 days. Figures that the workout room at the hotel I was staying at this week was out of order. I don't even know what that means. I guess they were renovating. That's no excuse. Just throw some dumbbells in the hallway, give me a cable machine to work with, and I'm usually good. But no, got to take out all the equipment. Apparently that was God's way of telling me, you're going to start from square one this week and you're going to like it. Challenge accepted. I think that's like the first time in 4 years at this point that I've gone a whole week without doing some kind of workout routine. My body is sore. But that's not going to stop me from doing this show. Not today. Today's a big one. We got a Clash of Champions event to talk about. A significant clash to a lesser degree. We've also got Midsouth Wrestling. It is the Friday show here on the Five Starr Wrestling Report. The wrestling podcast nobody knows but everyone needs. Make sure you subscribe, comment, like if you have not already. We do shows here on YouTube and Rumble every Monday and Friday. And I hope everyone's pumped and ready because, well, I got a lot of notes here for both shows, actually. So why don't we start from the top with Retro WCW and see what big events went down on this one. It's time to talk about Clash of Champions 10, the Texas Shootout edition. One of the few Clash events that the WWE still hasn't uploaded on their WCW YouTube page. Gotta get on that, guys. This is a monumental event. A game changer. A turning point. No, it actually wasn't. Honestly, outside Sting blowing out his ACL during the brawl angle at the end, there is virtually nothing on this 2-hour show worth caring about. And man, those Corpus Christi, Texas fans, let me tell you, they didn't suck all night. I believe the attendance figure for this thing was 3,000 to fill the Memorial Coliseum. I would say for about the first hour, it sounded more like 30 people were in attendance. God, the announcers' voices echoed through the entire building like they were doing commentary in an abandoned cave. It was wild. I think the only man excited to actually be there for this thing was Terry Funk. Probably because he had the shortest distance to travel compared to everybody else. He was all about that opening spiel before he pitched to Gordon Soley in the back. And Gordon sounded about as bored as me in algebra class in middle school. I think that's just his personality. He brought the Road Warriors in for a quick promo, basically to hype the match with the Skyscrapers for later on. This entire interview was absolute comedy. The single most diametrically opposed personalities in the entire company, the Road Warriors and Gordon Soley. You got Hawk and Animal raging and screaming to the top of their lungs. Their veins are jutting out of their arms. These monstrous-looking beasts. And then Hawk at the very end goes, "Tell him, Gordon." Gordon just very calmly responds with, "The action is coming up soon. Let us go down to ringside for the opening match." Yeah, keep that energy up there, Gordon. That had to be a rib. Like, Gordon, we know you're a pretty straight, soft-spoken guy. How would you like to do an interview with Hawk and Animal? Surely you guys will mesh perfectly together. Like oil and water, my man. So I know it's a full card. I think in total we had like 7 matches on this thing. Other than the cage match and all the stuff that went down between Sting and the Horsemen throughout the show, frankly, I don't think it's worth really spending all that much time getting analytical with these matches. Dr. Death versus the Samoan Savage was purely notable for Steve's entrance. They flashed a graphic on screen that read, "Dr. Death, prescription for punishment." At which point we see Steve kick open the back doors of an ambulance, and he utters the following quote that I audio capped because, well, I'm going to let you be the judge of what Steve actually said here. I have my own theory. Now, I'm about 90% sure he meant to say rescue as opposed to, well, what was clearly evident based on the audio clip there. I'm going to give Steve the benefit of the doubt and say he wasn't planning on committing molestation. He doesn't seem like that type of guy. For the record, I have absolutely no idea why they decided to shoot an entire inset with Dr. Death loading some random guy into an ambulance and attempting to give him heart resuscitation. One can only assume some brain trust saw the title Doctor and figured it'd be cool to pretend Williams was a certified EMT. Regardless, match was fine. Cornette's headset was completely fucked up on commentary. Could barely hear a word he was saying through the entire night. I'm pretty sure the audio headset was working, but everything just sounded totally muffled. They never actually fixed the issue, which is a total lol WCW moment. Guess I shouldn't be surprised. We had a woman come out to watch at ringside, which might have been the entire highlight of the segment, although she contributed nothing to the match aside from giving us something pleasant to look at on occasion. Williams went over with a backslide. I forgot that Humperdinck was still managing the Samoans now that Paul Lee was out of the picture. Like, they never made an attempt to explain how Humperdinck just randomly showed back up in WCW to manage the Samoans. One week he was there, and that was the extent of the explanation. Harmless enough segment, but pretty much what you would expect to see on a standard Saturday night syndicated program. I'll tell you what wasn't harmless. It was this abortion of a WrestleWar promo they aired. I was both offended as a wrestling fan and a semi-professional musician. Whoever wrote and or came up with the idea for this, I hope that son of a bitch is buried 10 feet under right now, because Christ, this was atrocious. In fact, it was so bad, I can't even attempt to explain it without just outright playing you the audio clip. Now, I can't guarantee this won't get copyrighted. If it does, I'll have to censor it. But I'm going to roll the dice here and presume that I'm safe to play this.
Listen, homeboy, and gather around. WrestleWar 90 is about to go down. Ric Flair, the champ, testament to biology, makes Sting the dream of entomology. Lex Luger, the belt, his holy grail quest is scheduled for an operation on Dr. Death. Road warriors, survivors from a place-time forgot, plan to reduce skyscrapers to parking lots. The Steiners, they brothers, they wrestle as one, but they do not scare the brothers and the son. WrestleWar 90, a wild thing to see. Available through your cable company. Pay-per-view, excitement from THE, going down the 25th of February.
It's even better with the graphics. I swear to God, that was an actual thing they aired. It was painfully 1990s in every way imaginable. I mean, we often take for granted promo packages in wrestling nowadays, especially with WWE and the big production value, using actual bands to use as theme songs for pay-per-view events. Yeah, it was pretty rough at one point. Low value effort is what I call it. Even with the limited technology they had to work with around this time. But it was just laughably bad. So we do get to our first big angle for the Clash. Terry Funk brings out all the horsemen for an in-ring interview. You got Flair, you got Ole and Arn, and you got Sting. And as we've been talking about with the weekly reviews, Sting being an honorary member of the Horsemen always was going to be a short-term storyline deal. You always sensed that something was off with Sting trying to affiliate himself with Flair, Ole, and Arn, especially with all that bad blood and history together. And so that all basically came to blows here. Ole, by the way, was the star set of this entire segment. I mean, he pretty much laid the foundation for everything we saw take place. Immediately out of the gate, he's telling Sting that they've held their tongue for long enough. They are officially removing Sting from the Horsemen. Now, what Sting didn't realize was that he was never supposed to be in the Horsemen, period. When Flair called Ole and Arn to come back to WCW, he did so with the intent of having them take out Sting for good. But some roadblocks got in the way of that happening. First, Sting was one of the first guys to come to the aid of Flair when Terry Funk and the rest of Gary Hart's crew tried to target him. And nobody expected that. So Ole and Arn held off. Then at Starrcade, Ole and Arn were about to take out Sting after he beat Flair in the final round of the Iron Man tournament. But then Flair gave him the Iggy and told him to hold off again out of respect. So they've spared him on more than one occasion. But what officially sealed the deal, what made them decide now is the time to remove Sting, now is the time to give him an ultimatum. It's when Sting signed the contract for his world title match with Ric Flair at WrestleWar. So now Sting has a decision to make. He has 2 hours. He either goes to the board of directors and removes himself from the title match with Flair, or the Horsemen are going to make the decision for him. To which I sardonically wrote, "No need to worry about that one, Ole. Doug Dillinger took care of that issue in the main event for you." So, well, naturally, Sting was not very happy about this. He tried to talk sense into Flair, who's basically telling him to make the right call and not be stupid. So the Horsemen grab Sting and pull him into the ropes. Flair slaps him around for a little bit and gives him one final warning. Then they end up dropping Sting in the middle of the ring before leaving together. At least you can respect them for giving Sting the option. You know, it's like, we could hypothetically kick your ass and leave you for dead right now, but we're nice enough assholes to let you make that decision, Sting. So do the right thing. So they're dicks, but they're not cold-hearted dicks. Admirable. And you know, it's an angle that I remember being pretty substantial when you look back at WCW throughout this year. I liked everything they did. It was an integral piece in moving the Flair Sting program forward. I guess when I look back, like, even knowing that Sting being in the Horsemen was only going to be a temporary thing, I know this is extremely nitpicky, but it is kind of odd how Sting never really saw any of this coming. Like, it's one thing for him to let his guard down, but I don't know. Did he actually think Flair wasn't going to take issue with Sting challenging for the world title, despite them both being in the same group? I mean, heel Horseman was always going to be a more natural fit, so the turn made sense. But even in storyline, like, you have to wonder how Sting was totally caught off guard by everything that happened here, especially knowing who he was dealing with. But again, good segment. It helped to set up everything that transpired later in the main event. So, thumbs up. Good way to move the needle forward. I always like when they do these overarching stories throughout the course of a 2-hour pay-per-view event. So then we had Brian Pillman and Tom Zenk versus the Mod Squad. Yeah, those guys are back. Remember the Mod Squad? That hot streak they had in the NWA in like early to mid-'87? The good old Jeffers brothers. I still have no clue which one was Basher and which one was Spike. I've seen like half a dozen Mod Squad matches since we started these NWA reviews. I never know which one's which. The funny thing is they're not even twins. They're just brothers. And they still look totally generic and interchangeable. As you would expect, it was a get-over enhancement match for Pillman and Zenk. Heels worked over Pillman for the heat. I did notice there was a substantial amount of booing for Pillman and Z-Man at certain points. And I especially noticed it when Z-Man was in there doing double-team spots with Pillman early on. But it's weird because then he got a pop for the hot tag at the end. I couldn't figure out what was going on. It's like the people wanted to cheer for Pillman, but they realized he had Tom Zenk as a partner and were like, ugh, fuck this guy. We want Pillman. So Zenk made a short comeback and got the pin with a drop kick on the skinnier of the two fat Mod Squad members. I should note that Zenk nearly missed a flying crossbody out of the corner, which, to be fair, wasn't totally his fault. The one Jeffers brother was out of position for it. I only really noticed it, though, because they chose to show that move in the slow-mo during the replay. The one move that they should have avoided showing because it was nearly botched. Great job, guys. Awesome attention to detail. From there, we had Cactus Jack versus Mil Mascaras. And the only reason this particular match was notable on this card was that Jim Cornette has talked about it several times on various podcasts and interviews. And it really is an amazing insider look at just how clueless and dumb these people were when it came to recognizing talent. The whole idea for this is we're in Corpus Christi. Mil Mascaras is obviously a big name in the area, so we'll bring him in as a special attraction and put him over. In theory, not a bad idea. But there were some problems. The big problem is that it was WCW in 1990. And nobody gave a flying fuck about Mil Mascaras. God love him. The other problem, as Corny's documented, he, along with several other members of the booking committee at the time, they really wanted to push Cactus Jack and get him over as a star in WCW. But there were intervening forces that got in the way of that ever coming to fruition. So this is basically Cornette's way of backdooring Cactus onto the card to spotlight him, even though Mascaras was the one they were putting over in the end. Because he figured Cactus would be able to do all his big spots. Mascaras' only concern was whether or not he was going over. So I don't think he really cared one way or the other. And I do want to be fair, because I'm objective. I know Jim has spoken very highly of this particular match, mainly because of the big angle that happened at the end before Mascaras won. Aside from the apron bump where Foley took the big fall onto the concrete and made it look like he damn near killed himself, the rest of the match was very boring and kind of monotonous. Several of the fans tried to start a boring chant at one point, and they weren't totally off base for doing so. It was Mascaras pulling out all his big famous moves while Cactus sold and tried to draw as much attention to himself as possible to keep the fans engaged. Elsewise, I think they would have fallen asleep. And of course, we get the big spot at the end where Cactus is going to try to give Mascaras the big elbow from the apron, but he doesn't realize that Mascaras had already climbed back into the ring. So he turns around and eats the drop kick. Cactus goes ass over tea kettle onto the concrete and smacks the back of his head off the floor. Cornette's having a seizure on commentary to put over how sadistic the bump was. Viewing the tape back, it was pretty gnarly. I wouldn't say it was Foley taking a backdrop through the top of a cell onto a chair gnarly, or him getting tossed off the top of the cell by The Undertaker gnarly. But it was still pretty brutal looking. That's the problem with watching Mick Foley over the years. On the scale of 1 to 10 in terms of intensity and bumps, I don't even know if this one even registered. Then, of course, the thing that's supposed to make Cactus look strong here is him breaking the 10 count before Mascaras put him away with a big splash. It's one of those matches that's only really known because of hearing Jim talk about it multiple times. Without the context, it was just kind of another standard run-of-the-mill TV match on a Clash card. Better than Norman the Lunatic versus Kevin Sullivan, which we're about to talk about. But that's also a very low bar. I think I would have rather won the date with Missy Hyatt for NWA main event than have to sit through this dog and pony match ever again. You all know what I think about the Norman gimmick. I thought it was incredibly stupid and childish. Hated even more when they tried to make him a babyface, despite him still being the same character. So we get Norman versus Sullivan, Falls Count Anywhere. I think this was mainly an excuse for Sullivan to book another one of his bathroom fetish finishes, where the fall takes place in the women's restroom. We only saw it like 8 more times throughout the Nitro era. 7 of those involving matches with him and Benoit. This showed Norman at the zoo making fun of Sullivan by hanging out with the pigs. The only redeeming part of that was Jim openly calling Norman a child molester, saying he had no business being around little children like that. It was up there with him calling Shawn Michaels a fornicator on Raw last year. I believe this particular match also began the trend of blatant sponsor plug graphics in the middle of matches. They had Rouge Shoes logos on the turnbuckle posts. They also pointed out that Norman was wearing a Rouge shoe. Only one, though, because Norman doesn't know how to match pairs of shoes. So yeah, shameless sponsor plugs during wrestling matches. Wonder what company that sounds like. Oh, this is still far less egregious than what we get with WWE today. I mean, I'm making a joke, but trust me, this was fine. And I'm not going to sit here and analyze every detail of what happened. They brawled around ringside. Cornette spent most of the match making dumb and fat jokes at Norman. All of which were funny, by the way, just not entirely productive in getting over the match. Aside from signifying that it sucked and had no value. Which might have been Cornette's point. I don't even know. At one point while Sullivan is working over Norman, I got up to check my pork tenderloin that I stuck in the crock pot about an hour earlier. I came back in the room about 3 minutes later and Sullivan was still working over Norman. By that point he had stripped him down to his wife beater and pants. I left the room to go check on the pork tenderloin again. They eventually fought into the back where we got the incredibly stupid finish here, where we see Sullivan run into the women's bathroom while Norman, Nick Patrick, and Gordon Sully are standing outside. We see one female do a terribly acted cry in terror as she ran from the bathroom. Norman then entered the bathroom with Patrick while Gordon gleefully and eagerly attempted to follow them in to capture the activity. Turns out they locked the door, so Gordon did not get a chance to see any titties. We then hear very comically over-the-top Looney Tunes thrashing and bashing behind the door, followed with the occasional Nick Patrick line of, "Come on, Norman, stop that. Don't do that." By the way, everything I'm telling you actually happened. I'm not making any of this up. The camera guy, mind you, he's just standing outside filming this stationary door the entire time this brawl is going down. And we finally see Sullivan emerge from the restroom and take a Flair flop onto the ground, at which point Norman and Patrick exit the bathroom. Norman has a toilet seat and a roll of paper in hand, and Nick Patrick has arbitrarily declared Norman the winner of this Falls Count Anywhere match. A fall that was not captured on camera and allegedly happened behind closed doors. In a women's restroom, no less. And the worst part, we didn't even get to see Norman give Sullivan the swirly. So yeah. Probably apropos this whole thing went down in a bathroom, because it was quite shit. I can only presume that Sullivan was fully responsible for booking this fiasco. It was either his way of saying, I don't give a fuck and this is what we're doing regardless of how idiotic it is, or he actually thought any of this was a good idea, which is even worse. Dog shit. Absolute dog shit this was. One of the worst matches in the year 1990, guaranteed. And we're only in February. I mean, it's not even like anything that preceded the bathroom humor was good anyway. From the moment they rang the bell to start the match, the whole thing was god-awful. Bowling shoe ugly, as someone famous quoted. So then we come out of that, and we go back to the ring for a Lex Luger promo, which is the precise wrong thing to have followed up this Falls Count Anywhere match with. But they did it anyway. It was such a wacky introduction, too. Terry Funk takes like 5 minutes to recap the Horseman segment from earlier, where he was the one in grave jeopardy of being harmed. Comedy. So he's calling out everybody in the locker room for being too scared to try to come out and save Funk, including the guy that he was about to interview here, Lex Luger. So out comes the package to basically explain that everything we saw happen with Sting was justified. The fact is, Sting should never have been the number one contender for the world title. Luger's had his eyes set on the title for a while now. Everyone knows the history between him and Flair. They're not friends, but they've also grown to share a mutual respect through their many battles. So he's kind of doing a semi-heel promo, even though he's not deliberately saying that he and Flair are on good terms. And he's going on for a while, as Luger typically does. A lot of rambling and talking in circles. He's trying to put over his accomplishments. You can see that there is no end game in mind. And meanwhile, you can tell that Funk is getting the Iggy and trying to get Luger to wrap his fucking point up so they can go to commercial break. But Luger's on a roll, baby. He's got more talking to do. So he's going to get his shit in and fuck the sponsors. And finally, Funk has to butt in and tell Luger that they've got to go to break. So Luger never got to finish his thought. It was great because you could tell Luger was trying so desperately not to laugh at the end. Thank God Funk was the one holding the mic here. Because I think he might have been the only man in that venue that could have found a way to shut Luger the fuck up. My God, dude. This was the epitome of I'm here to get my stuff in, brother. They told Luger beforehand, you got 2 minutes. Make it count. And Luger went down the aisleway and decided, you know what, fuck him. I'm going to take 5. An amazing segment. So we do get the Skyscrapers versus the Road Warriors, which I'll admit, I was expecting way worse than what we got. I figured before they even rang the bell, even with them playing Sid's canned WCW theme, still probably won't be enough to save it. I was wrong. It was slightly less horrible than what I was anticipating. I did like them showing the Road Warriors destroying junkyard cars during the inset. There was just something about that visual that totally worked, even though it made little to no sense. Keeping in mind that this was totally counterintuitive booking when it comes to how the Road Warriors should be featured, with them selling and working from underneath at various points. On general principle, that should never happen. But they still made it work. I thought Mark in particular looked really good here, considering his experience level at the time. I have no idea what was going on with his sunburnt back. Apparently he was tanning for too long in Corpus Christi that day. Beyond that, he was probably one of the standout workers in this match. Again, anytime I watch Hawk and Animal sell, visually I don't buy it. Even when they're paired with guys bigger than them. Which was the problem when the Road Warriors were booked to work with guys of equal size and stature. The matches never worked. Again, though, given with what they were dealing with here, it was still 1,000 times better than it had any right to be. Hawk got driven into the ring post to set up the skyscrapers, taking control. And Mark worked a lot of the offense, which came together okay. There was a moment where I shrieked in fear as I watched Spivey and Callis attempt to give Animal the double back suplex. Mainly because Animal was supposed to land on his feet. And he did. But that was a dicey moment. I would not have trusted Spivey to give me a back suplex to where I'm supposed to land on my feet. Fuck that. But Animal's a trooper. He did it. And that set up all the chaos at the end where Teddy Long tried to feed Callis a chair after the Road Warriors hit Spivey with a Doomsday. There was a ref bump / distraction spot that led to the managers going at it. At this point, it was probably the match that had the most heat out of everything on the entire show prior to the main event. There was a spot where the skyscrapers were supposed to pile drive Hawk on a chair, but Spivey completely missed the chair because he's a fucking moron. So, of course, he made up for it by hitting Hawk in the back of the head with a chair as hard as humanly possible. Like 5 or 6 times. Lovely. And so, well, I think the Road Warriors won by DQ. It was never announced. Presumably they won the match. As noted, I went in with absolutely zero expectations. But I'll be damned if I don't say this might have been the best skyscrapers match I've ever seen. Now, at best, it was a middle-of-the-road TV match. But still, totally fine match. It's ironic how this winds up being one of the last skyscrapers matches we end up seeing before they disband. But there you go. And then we had Doom versus the Steiners. This is the advertised title versus mask bout for the tag belts. If Doom win, they get possession of the gold. But if the Steiners win, Doom have to unmask and reveal their totally secret identity that nobody knows about because it's not completely obvious that it's Ron Simmons and Butch Reed. That was a joke. Butch tried to yell something to the fans before the opening bell. I couldn't make a word out of what he said. And he used the house mic. Probably called him suckers and some of the classic Butch Reed verbiage. So we had the overarching theme throughout the match where the Steiners kept going for the Doom hoods, which Admittedly, I'm not sure whether or not that would have been grounds for a DQ. As we found out toward the end, it didn't matter anyway. But Doom took the brunt of the beating in the early goings. Things eventually turned around when they cut off Scotty and spent a while illegally double-teaming him behind Patrick's back. Rick finally got the hot tag so he could run wild on Doom for a minute. And eventually we get to the spot where Rick pulls off Doom number 2's mask. Shocker. It's Butch Reed. And then he immediately rolls him up and pins him. So let's recap. The stipulation was that if the Steiners win, they get to unmask Doom. Meanwhile, they end up unmasking one half of Doom before the pinfall anyway. And the ref let it go because pro wrestling is silly. It makes no sense, but we'll just go with it. Again, it's not like anyone with half a brain couldn't already tell who they were. So then you get the big dramatic reveal with Ron Simmons taking off his hood. There was a mild to barely a reaction from the crowd. Probably because it was no surprise. And then, of course, the grand question that comes out of all this. Does that mean Doom has to disband? Well, no. As a matter of fact, they continue to wrestle as Butch Reed and Ron Simmons, just without the hoods. And it led to them eventually beating the Steiners later this year to win the tag straps. And from what I remember, having a fairly lengthy run as champions before they end up splitting next year. I think, don't they end up wrestling the Horsemen later this year? I don't recall if that feud ever got off the ground, but I seem to remember Doom doing something with the Horsemen over the belts. It's kind of one of those weird ironies where you would expect them losing their hoods would solidify the evident downfall as a tag team, when in actuality, it wound up helping them. But we'll uncover more of that as we move through the timeline. For now, it's time to talk about the big one. I think what may be documented as one of the shortest length cage matches in wrestling history. Or at least it's certainly up there. Also a very strange dichotomy when you consider everything that went down with the Horsemen earlier. Now we got two quasi-heel factions going at it inside this cage. No definitive babyface team now, which probably explains the lack of heat until the big schmoz at the end. But let's start from the beginning here. Great Horseman promo beforehand, by the way. Ole laying out the ultimatum to Sting one final time. Flair telling Sting that he owes him. Forget yesterday. Forget all the palling up. This is the real Horseman, baby. The most elite group in wrestling today. And I gotta say, damn. It is good to finally see a full-fledged heel Ric Flair again. That was a huge thing missing from this product over the last year. And I get why they had to turn him face. Everything that went down as a result of his feud with Terry Funk. But just seeing Flair cut this heel promo, it reminded me of why I always preferred him as a bad guy on camera. He was so natural at it. Like, he could be a good babyface, but it just never had the same energy as when he was a heel. I guess you could say a lot of guys were like that throughout wrestling history, but personal preference. by this point, you probably forgot what the whole feud was about. You had Ole Arn and Flair versus Buzz Sawyer, Muta, and the Dragon Master. Again, it's heel versus heel, now that we saw the Horsemen turn on Sting earlier in the show. So from the fans' perspective, they really didn't have a definitive team to cheer for, which wasn't necessarily the biggest issue in the world. They wound up getting behind Sawyer, Muta, and the Dragon Master. In particular, Muta. God, Muta was so over in this fucking match. It's so sad he's not around for much longer because holy shit. The reaction he got when he tagged in to work with Arn, it was insane. But honestly, it was never really about the match at this point. It was all about seeing how Sting would factor into the decision at the end. So, despite everything going on in the ring, it was all kind of secondary in the grand scheme of things. The action was good for what it was. I'm going to talk about the Sting incident in a minute here, but let me first say, for all the talk about how Sting was the one who came out on the bad end of all this, fucking Buzz Sawyer, dude. That guy got backdropped into the cage, hit the ropes, landed upside down on top of his head and neck, and folded up like an accordion. How the hell he didn't get seriously hurt in that spot, I'll never know. Guy was a freak. That looked so bad. And all the while, he's the crazy motherfucker that decided he was going to do the big dive off the top of the cage at the end. But anyway, let's talk about the bigger incident here. The Sting injury. At first, when I go back and watch how this all played out, there's actually a major piece to this segment that I completely overlooked. And it was one of those things where I'm sitting there like, did I misremember how Sting exactly tore his ACL here? Because now I'm remembering this whole angle completely differently. I had originally thought that Sting blew his ACL out when Dillinger and the rest of the crew were yanking him down from the cage the first time. Because there's actually two pull-aparts here. There's the one where Sting runs down and he's immediately flanked by security and some of the top stars. And then there's the second occurrence where he breaks free and makes a beeline toward the cage. And that, I'm pretty sure, is the part where Sting gets hurt. Like, you don't see him hobbling or favoring anything when he gets pulled down from the cage the first time. But the minute he runs back and you see the guys pulling him down again, that's when you see Sting leaning over and talking with everybody. So you know at that point that he's fucked. But when you watch the tape, it's so bizarre. He barely gets like a foot off the ground before getting pulled down. The second time, not the first. And I watched it over and over again, and I'm like, how in the hell did that cause Sting to blow out his knee? It's not even like he was halfway up the top of the cage and had a lot of wiggle room between there and the ground before he landed. He was barely off the ground when you see him lean over and start favoring. I'm actually starting to wonder if something happened between him breaking free in the aisleway and running toward the cage. Like, maybe he got an awkward jump start, or somebody kicked him at the wrong time and it was adrenaline that kept him moving. It was just weird when I watched the whole thing play out from start to finish. You know he gets hurt here. That's apparent as soon as the match is over, because they show Sting visibly limping on one knee, and then they pretty much never direct the camera on him afterward. So that was the dead giveaway. And, you know, it's obviously shit timing for a variety of reasons. I mean, they literally just set up the angle an hour beforehand with the Horsemen turning. They were obviously moving in the direction of Sting and Flair for WrestleWar. Now all those plans completely went up in smoke. Literally because of a fluke injury that nobody could have seen coming. It's usually how it happens, right? If modern wrestling has taught us anything, fluke injuries at the worst possible times. They're the devil's kiss in this industry. And you can tell the fans knew something was up at the end. Like, everyone's looking up the aisleway, and there really wasn't a pop for the finish. Because I think by that point, everybody had already seen Sting in pain. So they had to figure he was messed up. Kind of took the piss out of everything. It's a damn shame. Not that they didn't bounce back from it later this year, but they had so much set on the table. And by the end of the show, poof. All gone. Just like that. And now it's hours of panic booking and seeing what can we feasibly do last minute to save this nightmare situation. And that is where we leave the suspense as we cover the next month of programming. Clash of Champions 10. It is a show that is purely remembered for the Horseman Sting material. Remove all that and this show is a steaming hot turd in a punch bowl. When the Skyscrapers match is runner-up for best match and or segment on the show, your show sucks. Dan Spivey in the running for best match on any card, that is a fucking crime against humanity. But that's what we got. They got about 3 weeks to turn their main event picture around. And without directly spoiling everything that happens, they tried their best. It's about the best compliment I can give them. Alright, Midsouth Wrestling, February 5th, 1985. Even though the supposed air date for it was February 7th. It's episode 283 in the archive records. I've come along this far with the review series. Not about to start using episode numbers to track where we are in the timeline. Whether it's the 5th or the 7th, it's still 1985, and boy, there's a ton of stuff going on with this product right now. Just within the last few weeks. Was it 2 weeks ago where I reviewed that really banger of a show with the Rock and Roll Express versus Hector and Chavo for the tag belts? We had Ted DiBiase winning the North American title from Brad Armstrong. Some fun stuff going on with Terry Taylor and Butch Reed as a tag team. You got all the General Akbar Army stuff. Yeah, Mid-South 85 is off to a really great start. And this show carried that same momentum forward. From top to finish, this one lived up to the hype that Joe Watts and JR forecasted in the cold open. What did Jim call it? A super hour of Mid-South television. And indeed it was. We begin with Buddy Landel versus Brad Armstrong. This to me is like the perfect example for what I would coin a hot pay-per-view opener. If you gave me a blank piece of paper and a roster of like 20 guys from around this time, tell me, book your ideal pay-per-view dream card. 100%, I would book Buddy Landel versus Brad Armstrong as my pay-per-view opener. No question. It'd be up there with Kurt Angle versus Rey Mysterio, or even the Hart Foundation brainbusters from SummerSlam 85 in terms of like all-time great pay-per-view opening matches. And I'm not going to use the term curtain jerker because that always comes with some kind of negative connotation to it. Like jerking the car is the kind of thing you'd expect someone to use derogatively to describe an undercard match that nobody cares about. But Landell versus Armstrong, that's the kind of match you put on any card in any opening match. It would tear the house down every time. Now, yes, I understand we're talking about Midsouth TV, but when you compare it to everything else we had going on this week, it was perfectly positioned on the card. Great pacing and psychology here. Budrow getting outworked early on, doing the typical heat getting thing where he'd throw tantrums and smash talk Brad on the floor. Eventually, Buddy cut him off and worked him over for a bit to build to Brad's big comeback. Little bit of a mistiming cue at the finish. Brad's supposed to come off the middle rope with a crossbody onto Buddy, and I think Bud was supposed to catch him in a fallaway slam position, and then Brad would turn that into a sleeper hold somehow. The timing was a bit off, so they didn't quite hit their positioning right. But clean as a sheet. Middle of the ring. Brad gets Buddy to pass out in the sleeper hold. Announcers did a nice job following up on Brad losing the North American title to DiBiase 2 weeks ago. They mentioned the leg injury angle, which didn't really factor into this match much. But this, I think, was more or less designed to give Brad a bounce-back win. Let everyone know that he's still in title contention and hasn't been completely knocked down in the pecking order. Really solid opener, though. I enjoyed it. And they were in and out in about 5 minutes. Probably not what many would consider a lot of time. Then again, most fans are now trained and conditioned to expect every match to go 15 plus minutes. But they didn't need that much time here. It was the perfect length. They went from that directly into the replay package of what happened last week between Kamala and the Iceman King Parsons. Two guys that recently made their way over from Dallas in the last couple months. For the Iceman in particular, he's been feuding with the Akbar Army and trying to get his hands on Akbar for the big face burn angle they shot on Dallas TV last year. And so they play the closing minutes where Iceman's making his comeback on the Giant. They do the ref bump spot, which leads to Hercules coming out dressed in a Friday outfit. Bill Watts immediately let the cat out of the bag when he goes, "That's not Friday. He's too big. Way too big." As if we needed clarification on that. So he helps Kamala get the pin on the Iceman. Then the real Friday came out to talk Kamala down so that he didn't try to gouge Hercules' eyes out. I can't judge one way or the other how good or bad the match was prior to the angle stuff here. It's Kamala, so odds are, even with the Iceman as a dance partner, match probably was not very good. But it's the same principle with how Jarrett used to book him in Memphis. Maintain the kayfabe illusion that he's an out-of-control monster who doesn't know how to wrestle because, well, the truth is Sugar Bear Harris couldn't wrestle worth a shit. That's why Jarrett came up with the idea for the Kamala gimmick. A stroke of genius. He also had a squash with Tim Horner this week. And I am certainly never going to complain about seeing Horner used as fodder. Match was what it was. But I had to mention something that Joel talked about here. Of all the ridiculous arguments to make, he's out there trying to claim that what we saw last week with Hercules, and this is almost a direct quote, it was one of the most egregious acts of subterfuge we've seen from the General Army. Now, I don't want to give Joe a hard time here, but really? Hercules dressing up in a Friday costume to help Kamala beat the Iceman in a TV match with nothing on the line? That is more egregious than Akbar burning the Iceman's face with a fucking fireball? I know it happened on world-class television, but come on, man. Let's not get carried away here. And that's not the only guy that's about to get his face burned by the General Army. Not to spoil things for a later date. But yeah, Kamala got the W there. Then we came back for more footage from the other week. Apparently they originally booked Buddy Landell and Dr. Death to face Terry Taylor and Hacksaw Duggan. But then Budrow got taken out of the match and replaced with Ted DiBiase as Dr. Death's partner. So they go to the film where we see Duggan fire up on both heels. There's about a half a dozen overbooked tomfoolery angles we see go down in the span of 2 minutes. Some of which I documented, and hopefully accurately. We had Buddy come out to interfere on behalf of the heels. We had Hacksaw getting pulled out to the floor and jumped by Buddy. We had Dr. Death working over Terry in the ring while DiBiase loaded up the glove to knock out Duggan on the floor. We got Duggan eventually making a comeback on the heels to set up Buddy interfering at the very end, which in turn not only led to the match continuing, it also led to Duggan laying out Buddy with a spear so that Duggan could pin Buddy, a man who was not a legal opponent in this match and had absolutely no rhyme or reason to be counted down for a pinfall, other than he's a heel, and the Midsouth referees do anything to avoid getting heat on themselves, even if it means counting falls for talent who aren't part of matches. The best part is the crowd didn't even care. They still popped. And so, well, here's where we find out that this whole thing is building to next week to set up Hacksaw Duggan and Ted DiBiase in a best dressed man contest. All of that stuff we just saw go down to set up a segment next week where they will show up in suits and the fans will objectively vote on who the best dressed man is. There is no other standard than the fans decide who the better dressed wrestler is. Because that won't be a totally biased decision. It is silly, I grant you. I just couldn't get over how they used that tag match to set up the suit-wearing contest. You know, it's like, we could book DiBiase and Duggan in a loaded glove on a pole match. Nah, let's do one better. Let's book them to dress up in suits and challenge each other on their looks. That's pro wrestling for you. Not quite sports entertainment, but definitely towing the line. So then we had Ted DiBiase versus Terry Daniels. It still amazes me how at one point, Terry used his entire Marine uniform as introductory attire. Like, you think about it, normally you see guys come out and they got some kind of basic ring jacket on, or maybe a robe, in Ric Flair's case. Something flashy, but doesn't take them an hour and a half to remove before their matches. Terry Daniels, he had the whole fucking Marine garb. Took him like half the show to take everything off just to get to his ring trunks. So, Well, the match is chugging along for a while. There's not really a whole lot of interest going on. Wrestling's fine, but it's all kind of basic stuff. Eventually, Ted starts working over Terry's leg, which was the meal ticket that won him the North American title a couple weeks back. And then we get this finish, which was a textbook way of how to make your babyface look dumb as fuck. I think everybody knows the rules by this point. It is illegal to come off the top rope with any offensive move to your opponent. So, Terry Daniels, who I assume knows of this rule, he tries to go up top to give DiBiase a missile dropkick with a bad knee. Had he connected anyway, he still would have been disqualified. So I don't even know why he was attempting the move in the first place, much less after having his leg worked over for the previous 2 minutes. So DiBiase just steps to the side. Daniels crashes and burns like a kamikaze pilot. And then Ted immediately slaps on the double leg Boston Crab and gets Daniels to give up. So, not only did he give up via submission clean, he also looked like the world's biggest moron for attempting a high-risk move that would have gotten him disqualified anyway. Again, Terry Daniels is supposed to be a babyface. It'd be one thing if he was a heel, because then you can make the argument, well, duh, he's a bad guy. Bad guys are supposed to be stupid in wrestling. No, this was just an idiot babyface making himself look like the world's biggest geek. Yeah. Private Terry Daniels. An experiment that fell flatter than a plate full of piss in Midsouth. Tell me when I'm telling lies. And so that brought us to our promotional match for the week. Or I guess the special attraction feature. It is a mixed tag consisting of 2 midgets and a big man per team. We have the Iceman in one corner teaming with Little Coco and Cowboy Lang. And they faced, without a doubt, my favorite dorky tag team in wrestling history. The one-off pairing of Jack Victory with Little Tokyo and Lord Littlebrook. How do you make Jack Victory look even more dweebish than he already has in our retro review series in the past few years? Not by constantly jobbing him out in opening TV matches on World Class. Not by putting him in a tag team with Rip Morgan and calling them the New Zealand Militia. No, even better, you have him captain the midget tag team and get pummeled around by the little guys. Now that's epic. Oh, by the way, since we're on the topic of dwarves and little people, this is kind of timely, so I thought I would mention it for pure laughs. Did you all see that viral video of the bodybuilder women getting completely pooned and outclassed by the midget bodybuilder guys? Girls, by the way, who were juiced to the fucking nth degree, and they still got embarrassed by the dwarves. Hilarious. I love karma. Seeing feminists get humbled brings a tear to my eye every time. So yeah, this is their glorified comedy segment for the week. They did all the usual things you'd expect with midget matches, including the cat and mouse game with Ronnie West, which was probably the best part of the match, if I'm being honest. Of course, the Iceman pinned Victory. Didn't really do much in terms of moving any storylines forward, but it was a fun change of pace. I still love going back and watching old film from these midget matches when the midgets were arguably in better ring shape than most of the grown men in the business today. put these guys up against some of these slapnuts I see pop up in AEW on occasion, I'd take the midgets over most of the modern wrestlers we get today any day of the week. These guys could take Mike Bailey and floss their fucking teeth with them. Orange Cassidy, give me a break. They'd bend that motherfucker in half. So then, we were supposed to get Hercules and Jake Roberts versus Shawn Michaels and Jason Walker, but that turned into an angle with the Iceman shortly before they rang the bell. So the Iceman runs out with a big leather strap, and he immediately calls Hercules Hernandez out, since he's the one who cost him the match with Kamala the other week. And this part was phenomenal. I don't know whether or not the Iceman was ever supposed to actually hit Hercules with the strap here, but when I tell you he caught Hercules with the brunt of that strap, dude, I ain't kidding. He leveled Hercules in the back and neck with this thing, to the point where if you actually look at Hercules and the way he sold it, I don't think that was supposed to happen. He sold it like someone had blistered him in the side of the head with a fucking paintball gun. He looked pissed. That was a look of, motherfucker, I'm going to get my receipt tenfold. JR sold it great. The fans lit up when they heard that strap hit Hercules' skin. It was a great TV moment. I'm thinking Hercules is going to get some revenge on the Iceman in more way than a work, if you know what I mean. So then we had Hacksaw Duggan versus Dr. Death. I believe this may have been the first time we've heard JR sell a match as a slobber knocker. There's a JR classic line. And I would certainly classify this one as a slobber knocker. Obviously, a lot of bad blood between these two in storyline. Not just going back 2 weeks, but well before that. Wasn't that long ago, we were hearing Dr. Death challenge Duggan on TV to football helmet matches to test his real intestinal fortitude as an athlete. So they're going back and forth, pounding on one another. There's an incredibly awesome mistimed splash that Dr. Death tried to give Duggan before he rolls out of the way. He got some great hang time on that thing. They end up bonking heads, which leaves both guys jockeying for position on the floor. And then to set up the finish, both guys are fighting over by the corner ring post. Then Duggan drives Steve arm first into the exposed steel. Announcers are selling it like Dr. Death just had his arm broken. So Duggan takes advantage and gets the win with a spear. And the bigger story they're telling coming out of this is the conditioning of Steve's arm, because he was still selling the hell out of it post-match. So we'll wait and see what the follow-up is. It is funny how uncaring the fans are when it comes to a heel getting injured. A babyface can rip a heel's arm out of his socket. People would be throwing babies in the air over it. It's just, hey, got to appreciate times when good guys were true heroes and the bad guys were considered the scum of the earth. The fans couldn't wait to see those fucking douchebags get hurt. You know why? Because they deserved it. So that left us with Terry Taylor and Hector Guerrero for the TV title. Jim Cornette was not at ringside with the Guerreros this week. So that whole angle with him showing up to manage the Guerreros in their title match with the Rock and Roll, it was a 1 week deal. Unfortunately, this particular match didn't do anything justice, but it is worth citing. If you've never seen footage of Hector Guerrero in singles action, you need to go find some film somewhere. I mean, the pairing with Chavo was always great, don't get me wrong. I like the Alamo Busters. But until you see Hector Guerrero work by himself, I mean, you won't understand just how truly talented that guy was. Everything you've ever seen from Eddie, a lot of that work can be attributed to the footage he studied of his uncle. Like I said, they only had a few minutes to work with here before the Rock and Roll ran out for the DQ. So you really didn't get to see much of what Hector could do. Trust me, he was a hell of an athlete in his prime. Kind of had to expect the DQ finish. Well, with everything that went down a couple weeks back between the Rock and Roll and the Guerreros. I liked Hector flipping out afterward and yelling at the babyfaces, "Stay away from my matches!" Too late, dude. It is disappointing we couldn't have seen a few more minutes here, but I mean, this segment got over what it needed to. They also played a video promo for the Dirty White Boys, who are going to be coming to the Mid-South area very soon. It was Tony Anthony and Len Denton. They also wrestled previously as the Grapplers in Memphis when they were both under masks. And Len Denton, you might recall, also had a singles run both in Memphis as well as World Class. We reviewed a lot of his work during his run in '84. I think some of '85 as well. Obviously, Tony Anthony became a fairly big star in his own right. Regrettably, his biggest claim to fame on a major stage is him showing up in the WWF as TL Hopper in '96, which immediately killed his career before it ever got started. But if you know your Smoky Mountain history and even some of the stuff he did as a singles in Memphis in the early '90s, he was a very talented worker on his own. It is weird because so much of anything I've ever watched with Anthony and Denton, most of the footage I've seen from them is when they were heels. There was a brief period in Memphis when they broke away from the First Family when they were feuding with Jimmy Hart for turning on him. I think that was right after the big heel versus heel blow-off between them and the Bruise Brothers in '83. But aside from that, other than their babyface run in Mid-South, I've only seen their work as heels. And they came into Mid-South in '85 with the Dirty White Boy gimmick, but they were babyfaces. Or at least, I remember them starting as babyfaces for a while. Maybe they turned heel when I completely overlooked all that. It'll be interesting to look back at it because I haven't seen the run in a while. Even when I was binge watching stuff on the network over 10 years ago. A lot of the stuff has slipped my memory, unfortunately. Looking back, though, I really enjoyed this one. I still don't think it beats the episode from a couple weeks back, but there was still a lot of great material here. I think the big thing we're looking forward to next week is the DiBiase Duggan suit-wearing contest. But even just looking at how feuds were pushed forward here, you know, there weren't a lot of explosive angles, but they still moved things forward and kept the top programs hot. I mean, your big feuds right now are centered around Duggan and DiBiase, everything going on with the Iceman and the Army. Is it Mid-South '84 pre-Superdome hot when Bill Watts was coming out of retirement to team up with JYD to face the Midnights? Not exactly. Or I'm sorry, not JYD. Stagger Lee. Don't want to break kayfabe. Is it that hot as a television product? I wouldn't say that. I mean, for me, nothing is going to top Mid-South from late '83 up till the spring of '84. Like, that, in my opinion, is still probably the greatest 5 to 6 month stretch of any wrestling product's time, bar none. in terms of booking, presentation, feuds, exciting television, ticket and revenue. That's the gold standard. And it hasn't been toppled or touched since. The Crockett 86 was phenomenal, but I would still take Mid-South 84. Memphis 83 was still a damn good year, but I would still take Mid-South 84. And as good as Mid-South 85 has been up to this point, 84 still hasn't beat. We'll keep pushing forward. And on that note, we're going to wrap it up there. Folks, thanks for checking out this Friday installment of the FSWR podcast. We'll catch everybody on Monday for the continuation of the Retro Raw. Again, those shows are going to be getting longer. I would suspect the reviews will follow suit. But keep posted for that. And I'll talk to you all soon. Take care, all. Peace out.